Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're a joint group of 3 organizations coming together, and I'd like to invite retired Judge LaJune Lang, lead organization Lang Johnson Development, to say a few words.
Thank you, Antonia. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We, as the Lang Johnson Development Group, have joined with the 106 Group and Equity Strategies to have conversations called community engagement, to be able to let the community talk about how they want to preserve history and how they want to honor people in the African American community. So part of preservation is knowledge. We need to know the knowledge centers, the spaces, the people, the places. So we're so happy to have our guest tonight who can shed more light on our history in Minneapolis. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Ms. Erin Kay is the Senior Architectural Historian for the 106 Group, and she will also say a few words. Erin?
Thank you, Antonia. It's nice to be with all of you. As Antonia said, I'm an architectural historian at 106 Group, which is based in St. Paul. And I'm here to support Judge Lang and Antonia through this project and tie in the hook to historic preservation. As Rob said, this project is being funded by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And so we are looking to have these conversations to really better understand and better document the built environment, as we call it. So buildings, landscapes, and places that are associated with the African-American experience in Minneapolis. And so there's several different ways we can talk about preservation. That might mean listing something on the National Register of Historic Places, establishing local landmarks, creating exhibits to tell the stories, and you might also have ideas that you'll share with us this evening. We do want to acknowledge that the National Register of Historic Places and the list of local landmarks, as they currently stand, overwhelmingly focus on the contributions of white individuals and events associated with white people. And as a result, these lists do not fully represent Minneapolis's history. And we also recognize that many important places associated with African-American heritage in Minneapolis have been lost or erased due to intentional arson, construction of interstates, urban renewal initiatives, among many other factors, which have created additional obstacles to properly documenting and honoring those places. So through these engagement sessions, we hope to significantly expand the narrative, and we'll be providing the city with number one, your input about how you'd like African-American heritage to be preserved. Number two, a list of places in the city of Minneapolis with African-American contributions to history or associated with those contributions. And then we'll also prepare a draft outline for a historic context study, which will be written in a future phase, and that creates the framework within which we can designate and nominate additional places and add to those lists. So throughout the event, we invite you to share in the chat any places that you feel are important and worthy of preservation within the city, whether associated with your own stories or stories of people that you know or admire or inspired by. So looking forward to the conversation, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Erin. Our researcher working with the Lang Johnson Development is Shanice Uniawa, and if you, I probably not pronounce your last name correctly, but if you could please introduce yourself, Shanice.
Thank you, Antonia. I'm a law student at the University of Minnesota. I've been working for Judge Lang for about a year now. It's been a real privilege working with her. This project has been amazing. I've been learning so much about African-American history, and it's really good to shed light on this topic because, like Judge Lang was saying, the first step for preservation is knowledge. If we don't get the word out and we don't give it to the next generations, it'll just be lost. So it's good that we're taking the first step.
Thank you, Shanice. It's my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's panelists for the theme family home, leisure and customs of African Americans, customs that became part of Americans' identity. I'd like to first introduce Ms. Vivian Jenkins Nelsen. She's the co-founder with her late husband, George, of Interrace, a diversity think tank located at Augsburg College in Minneapolis. She's nationally recognized as a diversity practitioner, trainer, planner, and researcher. Ms. Jenkins Nelsen speaks to thousands of people each year on leadership, change, and diversity. Vivian Nelsen was a Bush Leadership Fellow at Harvard University and a former Director of Administration at the Hubert Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota, and served as a co-president of the Minnesota League of Women Voters Board. She has authored several books, 11 books actually, many articles and essays. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Vivian. And next, Mr. Harry Davis Jr. was a golfer at Hiawatha for the last 20 years and a native Minneapolis resident for 75 years. Harry Davis has followed the plan for the future of our beloved Hiawatha Golf Course. Mr. Harry Davis has a family legacy in Minnesota of 153 years and has a very special interest in maintaining an 18-hole course at Hiawatha for the community. Inner city youth had little opportunity to play golf, except at Hiawatha because of cost and availability. Harry Davis has also had the pleasure of using the golf course from his youth, going back to 1957 when he was 11 years old and had the opportunity to meet Joe Louis, the legendary boxing champion of the world, who made an appearance at Hiawatha for young people and showed him the art of the game along with various golf shots. What a wonderful experience for young boys at that time. We have asked the panel members to comment on the following question, and they will have 25 minutes each to comment. This is the question we'd like the panel members to address. What do residents in Minneapolis know about the history of African American family home and customs that became a part of America's identity? What were beloved activities that children engaged in? What chores did their families depended on to preserve their garden harvests, hunting game, and fishing? What about activities like golf, ice skating, baseball, football, and boxing? And Vivian, if we could ask you to please comment on holiday traditions, special foods, neighborhood gatherings, and barbecues. What do we know about games and storytelling passed down from one's ears to the next, passing down the identity of what it truly means to be African American? Thanks again.
Well, thank you. That's an amazing question. And I'm just thrilled to be on with Harry Davis Jr. because your dad was president of the Phyllis Wheatley Board when I moved here in 1967. And your dad was always so kind to me. And I just loved him. He was just the best. So I just wanted to pay tribute to that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as a young social worker coming to Minnesota, I was surprised by really a lack of people knowing their history, except what was available at the various settlement houses, which by the time I got here were then called community centers. And so Hallie Q. Brown, in St. Paul, Phyllis Wheatley, and Minneapolis. These were the places where really knowledge was stored, and they both had libraries, and they both had stages, which is where a lot happened. And it was really amazing too when I first came that the stage at Phyllis Wheatley was really quite famous. A number of people had been on that stage, and it had been used by the community, to tell its own story. And it had been quiet for a while, some years before I got there. And so one of my jobs was to get that stage alive again. And so university students and university assistant profs were very, very helpful in doing that. And so we got people back on the stage, telling stories, the kids doing all sorts of really fun things with the young people from the youth. Now, I want to also say, too, at this point that from my view as an outsider, there were groups of people who held the stories, and I would listen to Harry Davis Sr. tell many stories about how life was when he was a student. And the Phyllis Wheatley was where Black students lived because they couldn't live in dorms at the university. So there were many small rooms upstairs where people, they had a kitchen upstairs that was really terrific. And to make a long, terrible story short, these places really came alive at holiday time, particularly Christmas. And so you would get the various Christmas stories and so forth and so on the stages. So in terms of, I don't want to miss too, churches have been very important, speaking of holiday time, because we look to the churches for concerts, for special events, and there always was something going on, particularly concerts, church choir concerts, and they still go on, and they're just wonderful to attend. Also, you look for stuff on stage in the wider community, but still tells our story. For example, the Black Nativity has been on several different stages through the years, but it's a wonderful thing, and I've followed it from Orchestra Hall, the Guthrie Theater, Hallie Q. So it's something I hope that we never lose at holiday time. And Rambo, somebody help me with his full name. Michael Rambo has really been a key person. Now I want to also say that another place where our history is being kept, if you will, and used with students. I'm on the board of the Plymouth Youth, Christian Youth, PCYC, and we have a new theater, brand new theater that was just dedicated last week, and so we're looking for much coming from the high school students who go to school there, and Michael is also involved with that. So if I sound like I'm pushing theater, I am, because it's a place where stories are acted out and they're very well told. Now, I want to also say that around the holidays, everybody looks and looked for the master storytellers. And right now things are starting to pop in terms of events that you can go to. Now, names that we all know, like the Tanda Zulu, Uzi Zulu, etc. These are key people who tell our stories, and they do so very, very professionally. And if you haven't checked into that one, by all means, because there are many of the events, because there's this wonderful group of master storytellers who are Black, who are telling our stories. So you don't want to miss any of those. Another thing on my list here is, of course, other things that groups of people would go to. Speaking of theater, once again, so for example, I was just invited by a couple of neighbors night before last to save a night in December to go with them to a Christmas show at the orchestra. So although it isn't particularly African American, the interesting part is that we support theater in the neighborhood, in the community. So now moving on back to church stuff, and I don't mean to call church happening stuff, but it's just a quick way of saying that there are all sorts of wonderful plays, and I adore children's plays at Christmas time, you know, where they forget their lines and stuff like that, and where the baby in the manger starts talking, and they can't shut him up. It's just adorable. And so churches have, many of them have the children's little plays at Christmas time. And even if I don't belong to that church, I like to go to them because it's just wonderful. Yes. So now somebody says, was Phyllis Wheatley a poet? Oh my goodness, yes. And we had at the Phyllis Wheatley an original first edition of her book. And she wrote before the revolution. She was writing at that time. And so we've been very careful with that. And if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure that the Historical Society has it. Now, I wanted to tell you one other interesting thing about getting ready for Christmas. And somebody needs to tell me how far am I into my time. I should have put a timer on.
You're fine. We're keeping track. Thank you.
All right. So in my notes here, I wanted to also say that we have some wonderful musical organizations, Grammy Award winning organizations, and they do concerts during the holiday season. So the Sounds, everybody knows who they are, and I was lucky enough many years ago when they were a student group at McAllister. I was their rehearsal pianist, and so I followed them and adored them from afar and near all of these years. So we always look for musical events that the Sounds are doing, and they usually are doing something in the holidays, and other groups as well. So one of the things that I think is very exciting is the kinds of food and baking and all that kind of stuff. I'll never forget the first fried turkey I had. I was like, oh my God, I've died and gone to heaven. This me. And it was like, frying a turkey? Really? You can fry a whole turkey? Yes, you can. And yes, it's very good. And yes, every barbecue from here to St. Paul and everywhere, when the first barbecue pots were available, everybody was barbecuing turkey for Christmas. And anyway, I really liked it because I hate stuffing turkeys. They're disgusting. But that's another story. Okay, now then, but getting ready for food. I'm a baker, and kids love, and I'm a kid at heart, kids love cookies and cooking. And when I got here, I discovered that there's quite a local history in baking and all of that stuff. Different ethnic groups, Russians, Scandinavians, Black folks. I was the designated fruit cake baker for my family. And I loved getting ready for, you have to start with fruitcakes if you're going to do them right. You have to start right around Thanksgiving, and you get them baked, and you get them, you start putting liquor on them weekly. And it takes a while for the cake to really absorb this. And I found that most Minnesotans knew nothing about fruitcake. And they all made jokes about fruitcake. Fruitcakes could be used as doorstops and all that kind of stuff. But fruitcakes in our family were, oh my goodness, they were beautiful. And they weren't dark and weird looking, like you see in places, I should name places so I won't, but there's a big box, can we say, a big box place, starts with a C, ends with an O, where you can buy fruitcakes. That was, oh my God, if you bought a fruitcake in our family, you would have been run out. So coming from the South, from Alabama, my auntie, Aunt Vic, who was the fruitcake maker, nobody could make a fruitcake like her. So I haven't done it now for a few years, but that was one of the things, and starting out, especially in the South, everybody made fruitcakes. In fact, wedding cakes in the early days were fruitcakes, and they were light fruitcakes. They had only like white grapes in them and like that. So fruitcake would last. It was from the Victorian era. Fruitcake would last for years, literally. You could keep it for years if it was properly packaged and iced. But anyway, so back to this. Fruitcake is just yum if you know how to do it. Then the baking of the cookies. Now, when I got here, I, for the first time, discovered fried cookies. I'd never heard of them. And it sounded kind of disgusting, actually. But as I not only got to know what they were and how to do them, I ended up being a fan. So what I'm talking about now is the Norwegian and Danish and Swedish cookies that everybody here eats, krumkake and this and that, and they sell them in the grocery store. I was just amazed. So I also got caught up into that because they're so pretty, and kids love them because they're so crunchy. But anyway, baking is, like I said, a big deal for me. And I love to have people over for coffee. And that's another thing that happens on the north side, at least where I live, is people start having you over for coffee and so forth. So, and we see more of each other in this time than we do any other time of year. And people invite you over to show you slides from their vacation in Greece and their vacation here. But this is, you don't see it when it really happens. You see it around Christmas time. So you're hoping you get invited because there's usually supper or something else. Now, I wanted to talk a bit now here about gardens. I'm a gardener. And one of the important things about gardens is teaching kids how to do gardening, teaching them what a weed is as opposed to a vegetable, teaching them how to pick bugs, the right bugs off of plants and leave others alone. It's also important to teach little ones not to step on and smash worms. We need them. So it's always fun for me when the real little ones want to get out with you. They're 3 and 4. They want to be a part of what's going on, and I say let them, encourage them, because my folks did that. And my mother and I gardened together when I was very little. And one time I actually saw her chop the head of a snake off with her hoe. Oh yeah, so there's a lot of excitement in gardens, let me tell you. And in that case, it was a poisonous snake, so she needed to kill it. But anyway, it's been really fun to discover how if you live near a lake creatures that live around lakes, like deer and muskrat and so forth, so they're going to find your garden and they're going to chew it. So you get used to just losing a certain amount of your garden to the wildlife that lives here. And I was really amazed at how the squirrels here, see, the squirrels where I came from, they were red. The squirrels here are gray. And my husband used to say that they're rats with fluffy tails. But anyway, they are very clever. And they would wait until my tomatoes were almost red, just a little left. And then they'd take them, bring them around to my porch, line them up, and then take a little nip out of each one. Dip, nip. They wouldn't eat them. They just ruined them so I couldn't eat them. But anyway, that they're very clever squirrels. So why do we need worms? Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? We need worms to actually make the soil ready for water. And we need the worms because they help our plants, the dirt around them stay somewhat soft, because we have clay, a lot of clay in Minnesota. And in every place I've tried to do a garden has been clay. And so I needed the worms to do that. Thank you. And also we needed the worms for fishing as well. My husband would collect them and put them in his bucket for fishing. Now, one last thing I wanted to talk about, and that is regarding gardens. My dad was very, very fine gardener, he and my mom. And my mom tells the story of being a Tuskegee and them stealing Dr. Carver's test cabbages and his test tomatoes. And they would go down by the Tuskegee River and roast them and eat them. And one day he said in chapel, everybody who ate the vegetables that had the white powder on them, you need to go right away to the nurse because you've been poisoned. And my mother said she and all her friends jumped up and ran out. And of course they hadn't been poisoned. He put flour on it, but then he knew who was after his garden. But anyway, so I will pause with that and say thanks for allowing me to talk about my favorite thing, holidays.
Thank you so very much, Vivian. And we will open up after Mr. Harry Davis has had the opportunity to talk to us. Thank you so much for these fascinating stories. Mr. Harris Davis.
Thank you. And thank you, Vivian. You brought back some memories of Phyllis Wheatley. What I'd like to do today is stick basically to Hiawatha Golf Course and how athletics and recreation many times in our community of color is a means to the end to go to college, to get scholarships, etc., to advance your education. So as young people, young athletes and young women and men athletes in our community tone their skills at recreation facilities, whether it was, we ice skated quite a bit in Minnesota. We swam quite a bit in Minnesota. You know, if you're in Minnesota, most of us knew how to ice skate. Now, I'll just give you a quick little overview. Judge Lang and I went to grade school, junior high school, and graduated from high school together. So if I make a misstep or say something that's not true, she'll correct me very quickly. So with that said, I'd like to give a brief overview of my family so we can set the table. Because when I make speeches, I say, I've seen the good, I've seen the bad, and I've seen the ugly of Minnesota. My great-great-grandfather was a Spanish soldier named John Wesley Harper, who was in the Union Army at a young age, but got shipped to Fort Snelling in about 1855, right during the Civil War, to be in charge of the cattle and the horses as a sergeant in the United States military. He was married to an African-American woman, and they had 16 children. They had 10 girls and 6 boys. Some of them were born in Ohio, where he came from, and others were born in Minnesota. With that said, I am the 5th generation of that family, and my grandson is the 7th generation. So the Davis legacy has been in Minnesota since 1858, when my great-great-grandfather got discharged in the military from Fort Snelling and stayed in Minnesota with his African-American wife, because going back to Ohio or Virginia was illegal. Therefore, we started with a very good legacy of telling stories and history about African-Americans' contributions in Minnesota, specifically in athletics. And I'll lead to golf course Hiawatha toward the middle of my speech. What we learned at Phyllis Wheatley Community Center, which was started by an African-American woman named Gertrude Brown, who started Phyllis Wheatley as a settlement house. And that settlement house, because we as children in the Minneapolis school systems did not have Black teachers, did not have Black principals, did not have Black superintendents, we had all non-African-American instructors. But here was the secret about Phyllis Wheatley. Earl Bowman, Gertrude Brown graduated from Wilberforce University. She came here to help young Black women transition to teaching in northern schools. Therefore, we as children at Phyllis Wheatley had the most educated tutors and teachers from nursery school all up through high school. Phyllis Wheatley was a part of our education of understanding who we were in Minnesota because of the lack of population that we identified with. I went to Central High School in Minneapolis, which was the first founded high school of the 11 in Minneapolis. It used to be down where Vocational High School is, and then it moved to 34th and 4th Avenue in 1914. We were very much aware of the legacy of our high school, our junior high school, and our grade schools, because in Minneapolis, like many other cities, they had redlining. That means the banks would only loan mortgages to people of color in certain zip codes. Fortunately or unfortunately, the 2 zip codes in the Twin Cities with the most African-American was 55411, which is North Minneapolis, and 55407, which is South Minneapolis. So when our fathers came home from the war and started getting out of multiple dwellings and duplexes and finding residential homes, they moved into 55407, not because they wanted to, it's because they were limited where they could live. And basically all of us lived on the south side of Lake Street, which was 30th, all the way to 50th on the south side. And then we bought homes as far as the west as Lindale and far as east as Chicago and Elliott. That was it. So we all went to grade school in that zip code, junior high school, where Sabathia Community Center is called Bryant Junior High. That's where we went. And Central High School was located where the Richard Green Middle School is now. Now, how did athletics and golf and other things play such a significant role in our lives? Nicollet Field, which is now called Martin Luther King Field, was where all of us grew up. Either we used Nicollet Field, Powderhorn Field, or Phelps Field, which is on 38th in Chicago. Fortunately for us, the park board was not segregated. So we could play against any other students, integrate our teams, and do anything we want at a certain level. But as you progressed up toward high school and college, the integration of the students started to dwindle because the park boards lost their influence of teaching at the high schools. Therefore, all of us honed our skills to try to get in a position to earn a scholarship to go to college, because unfortunately, our parents could not afford that extra income to send all of us youngsters to school. We also had exposure to the librarians at Hodgemere Branch Library, which is on 36th and 4th Avenue. Mrs. Doris Jones was a librarian, and she used to encourage us young students to come over there on Saturday, and she would open up the basement of the library and let us read books that we didn't see in the public schools, books that she would bring from her home on African-American heroes, African-American inventors, and African-American famous people. And to counter what Vivian said, Phyllis Wheatley was a hub of Black entertainment because the downtown hotels in Minneapolis were segregated. You could work at the Dykeman, you could work at the Leamington, you could work at the Curtis Hotel, you could work at the Nicollet or the Andrews, but you couldn't stay there. So my aunts and uncles were porters and elevator operators and cooks and maintenance people, but they could not stay in the downtown hotels because, to surprise many of them, Minneapolis was segregated. Who did that? Hubert Humphrey, who was the mayor in the early 40s, was a very progressive, straightforward, proactive mayor. And he found out after a couple of years of being mayor that we could work in the hotels, but we couldn't stay there. So he initiated something, and he had meetings at Phyllis Wheatley with the NAACP to strategize to how to integrate the downtown hotels. And he, through mayor's and executive rule, opened up the hotels, which they pushed back at. But if they're going to be a part of our downtown Minneapolis businesses, they had to comply with the rules of society. I'm going to lead into why Hiawatha Golf Course is so important to us. If any of you play golf, or if you don't play golf, the park board system in Minneapolis has 5 golf courses over their jurisdiction, and I'll name them. The first one is called Meadowbrook Golf Course, which is on Excelsior Boulevard, and it's located in St. Louis Park. The second golf course is Theodore Wirth, which many of you are familiar with, is in North Minneapolis. They have an 18-hole beautiful golf course, but they're located in Golden Valley. The third one is called Gross National Park. And if you know where St. Anthony is off of 280 on the highway, they're part of the Minneapolis Park Board system, one of the golf courses, but they're located in St. Anthony. And then the last one is Columbia. And LeJune will know this, that's part of Northeast Minneapolis. And if many of you are from Minneapolis, that was a part we did not live. We didn't go there at night. That was not a place an African-American showed any visibility in Northeast Minneapolis. That golf course is bordered on Columbia Heights. So here we come with Hiawatha, which is the only 18-hole golf course in Minneapolis, Minnesota, under the jurisdiction of the park board. Now, Hiawatha Golf Course was started in 1934. And the city planners knew at that time that was a marsh and was always going to be wetlands, because if you're familiar with Lake Nokomis and Lake Hiawatha border our golf course, and Minnehaha Creek runs through our golf course to go through the Minnehaha Falls. Unfortunately, that golf course is lower than the 2 lakes. So when we have too much rain or too much overflow, it overflows our golf course. Therefore, the DNR and the state of Minnesota and the Minneapolis Park Board had to decide to save that golf course from 1934 right up to the day, 87 years. They had to annually pump the water out of the golf course to keep it dry and feasible to play golf. Everyone knew it, everyone agreed to it, and there was no issue. But here's the secret. We could play at the golf course, we being African Americans, my father and grandfathers, but we couldn't use the clubhouse. So you could play your fees, you could play on the course, but you couldn't use the restroom, the showers, or go in and get a snack in the clubhouse because they wouldn't allow Blacks in the building. A lot of people didn't know that. If you do your research, you'll find that out. So now all of a sudden in 2018, One of the park board members, and I won't mention her name because it gives her publicity, decided that Hiawassee should become a natural reserve for that part of the city, and she was going to lead the charge to close the golf course. There wasn't any reason. There wasn't really any philosophy. There was no data stated. They decided, whoever they were, that that's just the way it's going to be. Now, historically, in Minneapolis, like most urban areas, large cities, there is a section of color that seems to get pushed aside when we come up with urban renewal. Selby Dale's a classic example. South Minneapolis is a classic example. If any of you were here in 1954, 35W was a classic example. 35W was a result of people living and working in downtown Minneapolis having to get home faster to Richfield and Edina and other south suburbs. When I was a youngster, you went downtown Minneapolis going north by Park Avenue, and you came home down Portland, Lindale, took the bus, et cetera, et cetera. But let me tell you what happened. In 1956, when I was in 4th grade, we got a notice that part of our community was going to be cut in half by this new great 35W freeway, so everybody could get home to the southern suburbs quicker. So they decided to start tearing down 1,200 homes from Lake Street all the way to 62nd Street to make way for this freeway. And guess what zip code that was in? 55407. And Lejeune remembers this because Lejeune lived on 2nd Avenue, I believe, and faced this new freeway. And I'm not sure, Lejeune, if your parents had bought that house before they started the freeway. I think they had. So here we go again. Now here was the funny thing about that freeway. Here I was in 4th grade, and I had friends that lived on 1st Avenue, and I lived on Portland. So if I wanted to go, let's say Judge Lang lived on 1st Avenue and 36th Street. We could only cross that freeway down from Lake Street all the way up to 46th Street because the hole that they dug to tear our community right dead in half. So they took Central and Bryant, and they divided the kids that probably would have gone to Central, and they had to go to West. And some of the kids that were on the other side would have to go to South because the freeway was taking a part of the community the way that embraced 3 high schools instead of just 1. So what I'm leading into is that when you see people suggest for the greater good that we're going to close down a golf course to have people have bike paths and doggy parks and skiing in the winter instead of playing golf, you have to start to wonder who planned that and what was the reason. And I asked in one of the park board meetings, since the golf course has been open since 1934, did someone wake up in the middle of the night and say, well, you know, it's been a good run, but it's time to make a change because I think it's better for the greater good. No meetings, no public discussions. The park board said, this is what we're going to vote on. And that was in 2018. Well, they underestimated the community this time because we had had so much history with that golf course. We wanted to know why. We mean all the people that lived in that ward that had shared the experiences. Now, keep in mind, the golf course just didn't allow people to play golf. That golf course had many homes surrounding it. If you've ever been on Cedar Avenue and 46th Street, there are some beautiful homes that surround the golf course. And some of those homes were 2nd and 3rd generations that family. The grandpa had built the house, he passed it on to his son, and he passed it on to his grandson. So the community itself, if you notice the people that surround Hiawatha Golf Course, there's not a lot of multiple dwellings or apartment buildings. They're mostly freestanding residential homes. And every one of those people complain that if you close the golf course and you stop pumping the water because of the overflow, we're going to lose our homes or the value of our property to go down 15 to 20%. Who wants to buy a house that the basement's flooded every time it rains? So the park board didn't really think of the impact they were doing. Yes, it's recreation. Yes, it's golf. Sometimes golf is reserved for people that have access and money to it. But keep in mind, for the last 25 years, we had what we call a First Tee program to teach inner city children free of cost the game of golf. And one of the reasons that's happened because of the famous thing of Tiger Woods, which I didn't mention. Tiger Woods came to our golf course and made a presentation to youngsters saying, this is a game of golf. These are some of the skills you need. And here's some of the teaching we can get you for free if you're interested. So in some sense, say, Harry, now, why are we making such a big deal about the golf course? It's not Harry's golf course. It's the community's golf course. And we, for many times, we always complained because when my high school was tore down, my high school, and the June's High School, was the first high school in the city of Minneapolis. How many first of anything is tore to the ground? We try to get that on the national records to preserve that high school. But the park board and the school board decided logistically, we didn't think there was enough population to support that high school. But when the high school was tore down, 2 years later, they built a middle school and named it after Richard Green. Now that was great, naming it after Richard Green. But my question was, if there was no people to attend the high school, where did you get them from to attend the middle school? It was all a way of trying to manipulate the system to convince us it's always our community that suffers for the greater good of the entire community. What about our greater good for our community? Central High School just was not the first high school. Lejeune and I know this. We used to, if you look at those yearbooks from the last 104 years of that high school, you can see people like Eddie Arnold, James Arness, Arlene Dow, Frederick Adams, Orville Freeman, Mike Freeman's dad, the lady that played Lois Lane from Superman, Irving Severai, Halsey Hall, Prince, Jimmy Jam, Lejeune Lang, Gary Hines. The list goes on and on about people that are graduates from that high school, Bobby Lyle. So we're saying if you have an institution, it's not just a school. Central High School was not just a high school, it was an institute of learning, culture exchange, and integration of all kinds of ideas. We had the first Black man appointed to the Naval Academy by Hubert Humphrey that went to school with June and I, named Emerson Carr. And Emerson Carr got appointed by the Naval Academy in our graduation class. The year behind us, another young man named James Clark, who's Judge Clark, who just retired in St. Paul, was appointed to the Naval Academy. These kind of stories we learned over and over again in our community from our lay people, from our parents, from our grandparents. And this is the part of history when it came to Hiawatha Golf Course. Let me just share with you about Hiawatha Golf Course and how it helped integrate golf. If any of you know a lady named Shirley Hughes, who's quite the lady, her father's name was Solomon Hughes, and Lejeune knows who he is or was. Solomon Hughes, probably if he'd have been born a Caucasian man, could have been on the PGA Tour with Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, the greats. He was that good. But he couldn't get a card to play in the PGA golf tournaments because he was African American. He was a phenomenal golfer, phenomenal. He was playing golf in his 40s in tournaments, which many of us now couldn't even keep up with. So we decided to start taking the African American contribution of golf to this Park Board Commission to tell our story. And I'll tell you very briefly about golf in Hiawatha. In 1939, a man named Jimmy Slimmons here, who was quite the entrepreneur, young business entrepreneur man, had a dream. And he said that since we couldn't play in white golf tournaments, whether it was for the benefit of cancer, polio, diabetes, he was going to start say, okay, we'll have our own tournament and we'll have it either at Hiawatha Golf Course or Theodore Wirth. And he named the Negro Open Golf Tournament. Now, in those days, that word was acceptable. So he started that in 1939. He got contributions from all the businessmen around Minneapolis. He was quite the salesman. And he started that tournament and he used Hiawatha Golf Course as the launching pad because it was right dead in that zip code. He did that until 1954 when they changed it to the Bronze Tournament. Now, I think many of you here have heard of the Bronze Tournament. That tournament was so big, it used to be a week long. We'd get people as far as Ohio, Nebraska, Iowa, all over the United States to come to a tournament because many of the states outlawed African Americans to play in white tournaments. So we were the standard and we set that standard. Now keep in mind, even though we had tournaments there, we would put up tents and make our own food to serve the golfers because we couldn't use the clubhouse. Now think about that. you got a golf tournament at a golf course and you're eating in tents and other places because you can't use the facility. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. And that's when I said, Hubert Humphrey said, enough is enough. So he helped desegregate the golf courses in Minneapolis. Now, how does that relate to us today? I'll tell you one last secret about, not a secret, it's an assumption, but I kind of figured it out real quick. There was an article in the paper that the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, had made a suggestion that because of the water pumping issues in Lake Nokomis and Hiawatha were always going to drain the golf course, that they suggested, they being the DNR, that they close Hiawatha. That was told us by the park board. Well, sometimes you got to be careful of who you tell people, and maybe you're stretching the truth. I happen to know the commissioner of the DNR when that decision was made. So he was a friend of mine, and I used to go to coffee with him and talk about Hiawatha Golf Course. So I called him one day and I said, let me ask you a question, Commissioner. Does the DNR suggest to cities of when you can close a golf course and open up a golf course because of flooding problems? He said, no. I said, well, what do you do? He said, Harry, the DNR gives people permission and permits to pump water based on a certificate they apply for. If they're going to pump $1 million gallons of water out of Hiawatha every year, we give them a certificate and we say, go do it. Now, if you want to pump more or less, you have to get that amended. But we don't tell the municipalities where they can close golf courses. Where did you get that from? I said, well, that's what the park board said. He said, well, that's not true. I said, okay, can I use that? Can I email you and use that? He said, absolutely, you can use it. We don't tell them what to do. We work with them. So see, when it comes to what we call right-siding the inner city for the convenience of someone else, who does that usually affect? It affects new immigrants. It affects people of color. It affects people that have not the resources to move to the suburbs. But why shouldn't they have the same services and recreation that everybody else has? Well, how can I afford golf? It's not whether you can afford it, whether you can have access to it. Because if you have access to golf, everything, there's a will, there's a way to get finances. And you know something? I spent 14 years from the time I was 8 years old to get a football scholarship to the University of Minnesota. So I played for 14 years to get this scholarship, and I got one, and I was fortunate. And I thought if I was a little 8-year-old boy and I spent 14 years honing my skill on the golf course, I could have been another little Tiger Woods. But see, we have not access to that kind of information. So when you see me hooping and yelling and jumping up and down about the golf course, it's beyond that now. It's an inner city institution of excellence. It's an institution of education. It's an institution of access to a sport that you always kept out of. And there's some wonderful, wonderful Black golfers. Every Tuesday, we have a league at Hiawatha every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. And we call it the Old Negro Golf League. Now, that was coined way back in the 50s. And we still, out of respect to Earl Bowman and Ted Cook and Donald McMorrin, and we kept the name. There's 52 of us that play every Tuesday. And there's about 32 that are active members. And we have everybody from the first Black pilot of the Northwest Airlines named Woody Fountain, to judges, to Al Nunes, to Alex Rao, to Reed, to attorneys, to school teachers. We have every kind of African-American man from about 50 years old. We have one 88 years old named Bob Shelton, who shoots his age and still walks the golf course. And the amazing thing is when we're out there, every time we assemble like today and start warming up the plate, people will walk by and say, is this a tournament? What's going on? Nothing's going on. We're just playing golf. Because the recognition of golf has always been selective. So what we're saying is we're not doing it by osmosis. We're not forcing your hand. We're maintaining what we need for our community to help our children reach goals and philosophies and also teachings that they never had access for. I'll give you one parallel and I'll close on this one. When R.T. Ryback became mayor of Minneapolis, and all of you know R.T., he was raised around us, and his dad owned a drugstore around Franklin Avenue over by South. R.T. was a jogger and a bike rider. And if you know, over the years he was mayor, all of a sudden these bike lanes and bike paths and bike places and bike rental places. But you know what they did? Portland used to be 3 lanes to get home to Southern, and so did Park Avenue. Have you noticed now it's down to 2 lanes? And guess who's got that 3rd lane? The bike paths. And where did that come from? Mr. R.T. Rybick, because he was a biker. So now all of a sudden, if RT can influence a whole community, and I'm not saying against bike riding, it's great. But if there's a will, there's a way. So you know what I said? If RT can do that, I can do that. If he can make this city access to bike riders to be safer and have nice paths to go home at the sacrifice of us losing a whole lane of our freeways, of our streets, then why can't Harry Davis and a group of people go to the park board and say, okay, here's what we need in our community, and here's why we need it, and here's why if you don't hear us, you will listen, because we're not going to go anywhere. We got 2 things that happened. In closing, the park board was trying to close Hiawatha in 2018. We got Jeff Hayden involved, Peter McLaughlin from, and Representative Torres from Richfield, because Richfield had a golf course called Rich Acres, and they closed it down so the airport could expand. Now that's a fact. So she was quite sensitive to that because she got wiped out by an airport commissioner. So we got them involved, and we got it delayed for 3 years to 21. Then we got a more broader base of people involved, and we got it delayed now to 2025. But also now we have a Black candidate running for the 5th district, that the person who made that decision to close Hiawatha may lose her spot. So what I'm saying in general, Hiawatha was a golf course, but keep in mind, it's an institute of learning, it's an institute of skills, and it's also an institute of visibility, because golf is not just reserved for rich people that have access to it. It's reserved for all of us. And many times I play golf in suburbs all over the Twin Cities. And the first time I walk in the golf course, the people say, is there a tournament here today? I said, no, there's no tournament here today. Well, what are you guys? I said, what guys? Oh, I don't mean what are you guys? What's going on? Nothing, we're just here to play golf. Because subliminally, they don't believe that we have the access to and the ability to play that game at that level, and we do. There are a few golfers in my group who've been given an opportunity. You would see them playing on television, but the times, the money, and the opportunity is not there. But I'll tell you this, if we can stick it out, we will have more little Tiger Woods and Solomon Hughes and Jimmy Slimmons. And by the way, in closing, does anybody ever like a good slab of barbecue ribs? There's a place on 38th Street called Ted Cook's 19th Hole. Have anybody ever heard of that? It's a barbecue place, and Ted Cook named it the 19th hole because he was a classic golfer, and golfer has only 8 holes. And his 19th hole was the hole to get to the barbecue after you won the golf tournament. So with that said, I'd be open to any questions later, and I'm passionate about it. I'm not angry, but after living 75 years, like I said, I've seen our community be stomped on, and that was it. I've seen my grade school closed, was called Warrington on 36th and 3rd Avenue. My junior high became Sabatha Community Center. That was Bryan Junior High, and my high school bit the dust. And tell me how many towns that the very first courthouse, the very first church, the very first high school, the very first garage, or the very first airport was torn down. They still have City Hall down there. That courthouse is old as Methuselah. It used to be black till they sandblasted and made it look lighter. They would never tear it down because it was the first courthouse. So I'm saying, when all of our first got torn down, you're not going to take Hiawatha out. Now you take all other first, that's it. So now it's not, the fight is on. We've won that first battle. Now we got to win the war. So we're going to fight very hard to keep that open. And if any of you have questions or comments or have suggestions to keep us cooking, just let me know. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so very much, Vivian Nelsen, Harry Davis Jr. Thank you. Thank you for lending us your knowledge, your wisdom, and history to this evening panel. Are there questions for these 2 panel members who just gifted us with so much?
Yeah, this is Charles. Jump in here.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. What Mr. Davis was saying is absolutely true. I grew up here in Minneapolis, South Side, 31st and Clinton. All my schools are torn down. Clinton, Central, and I went to Bryant, which is Sebastian now. But I just want to let everybody know that I'm running for a Minneapolis Park Board at large as well. And from everything that I'm hearing, I will be fighting to keep Hiawatha open for 18 homes.
Thank you.
So because the thing about it is my brother, Kanawha Rucker, he used to be down there all the time.
He can play.
Yeah, that was my older brother.
Yep.
And, I was down there many a times, and, I'm not just, running to keep Hiawatha open, but for the youth, just like you said, Mr. Davis, for us in the city of Minneapolis, even when you were growing up, even when I was growing up, we looked up to you guys, and I looked up to Russell Gary and Rodney Lewis and, things like that. And, from playing at King Park, and then they recruited me to play down in McCray with Jack Jackman, and because Jack Jackman and my brother Kanawha were real good friends, so I ended up playing down in McCray. But just from those experiences, they told us things to do outside of just the athletic field, which was Hiawatha Golf Course. They took the teams over there sometimes and things like that. So it was a program where they allowed us to venture out and then, to take up other things. And then just like you said, 14 years of being in youth sports. Same here with me. I mean, I played football for the University of Nebraska, because Coach Robinson, I heard you guys talking earlier, I did go to his Hall of Fame induction. And, it just takes, our community is this always been a village. We always look out for each other. Is this what you're doing right now? You're looking out for, the only place that we could really play golf. I'm not a golfer, but just know that I will be fighting to keep it open.
I'd like to thank you very much for contributing to the discussion. I wonder if there are others who would also like to participate. Thank you, Mr. Rucker.
Yeah.
Hello, Brother Harry Davis. So are there any things that we can do to help petition to save those resources? It looks like Brother Charles is running for park board.
Yes.
So we can support him
Yes.
for sure.
Yes.
Are there any?
We have another candidate actually named Charles Rogers, who lives in the community. He's actually running in the ward that the lady who made suggestion to close Hiawatha Lejeune. So we're going to stand up to him right away and push his candidacy. The only thing I say, if you don't live in the district, you can't vote. Be willing to put up a lawn sign, make a contribution, make a phone call to your park board, or email your park, find out who your park board representative where you live. Now, if you don't live in Minneapolis, that's still okay, because you can still participate with talking to people that have access to the park board. I wrote to park board several times, and the staff outside of the park board members were very, very receptive. Just a quick history. We also had a young lady who graduates with June and I named Rochelle Berry. She was actually one of the first park board members, along with a man named Ed Solomon. So we've had representation on the park board, but there's 9 members. And it's hard to get your way. So what we're doing is try to balance that. So if there's 9 members, if we can get an at-large member our way, then that swing vote sometime can be the one vote, like we got the vote to stop them from closing down the 18 holes by one vote, a swing vote. The young lady of African-American that did that for us, she was the president of Park Board. So if there's a will, there's a way. And I'm glad to hear Mr. Rucker is running, because the more we get representation and vote, the better off we'll be. Then it's not a matter of protesting, it's actually taking control of your own destiny.
Harry, can you talk about Joe Lewis visiting Hiawatha?
Oh, Lejeune, that was an experience. You know, I lived on 36 in Portland, and most of my partners were living on 4th Avenue, Clinton, and 5th Avenue. We all kind of had a little group. We had heard Joe Lewis came here in 1957 as a golfer, not as the boxing champion, not as a speaker. He could really play golf. So Jimmy Slimmons got him to come here. And I believe that year, the golf tournament was at Theodore Wirth, Lejeune, and he played over there. But, you know, we didn't have access to the course that was on the other side of town. Now, I don't know how the word got in our community. The word can get out quick. We found out, us little youngsters, that Joe Lewis was going to come to Hiawatha and make an appearance. We didn't know what he was going to do, whether he was going to swing the clubs or show us anything. So the word got out, and all of us 11-year-olds got on our bicycles and took off to Hiawatha, and there he was. It was a word of mouth, and he talked about golf. He didn't talk too much about boxing because he had retired by then, but he said the value of golf, the eye-hand coordination, the many people you'll meet, different places you can play. And we were all so impressed that a heavyweight champion of the world became a golfer. That's not a happy marriage most of the time. Muhammad Ali didn't play golf, or Joe Frazier, or Joe Foreman, you know, or Sugar Ray Robinson. Was golf. It was Joe Lewis. So Lejeune, that got us interested in golf by a man talking about it that we recognized and we respected. And he was a wonderful golfer and a very gentle young man. I mean, man to all of his kids, and we had a ball. That's how we got introduced to him in the golf. And there's one real quick one. Years ago, before golf carts, they used to carry the golfer's bag. If you guys watch golf on TV, you see the caddy carrying the guy's bag all the time and the golfer walking down the course. Okay. Well, in those days, they had caddies, and they had a caddy shack. And on Saturday, if you wanted to be a caddy, you get over to the caddy shack at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning and stand in line for the caddy master to say, okay, little boy over there in the green shirt, do you want to carry 18 holes and out? Yeah, I can do it. So all of us little kids would go over there and stand in line to get picked. And we were little, and they would say, wow, you guys are too small to carry golf clubs for caddy. And we'd say, well, who told you that? Do you know what I can do? So we were kind of challenging them then, but what my buddies and I, we were slick. Both of us were small, but what we did, Lejeune, you and I, we volunteered, we carried together. You and I, you carry one end, I carry the other end. So the guy, this caddy man said, what are you two kids doing carrying the golf bag? So we responded and said, well, you didn't say one person had to carry it. You didn't say two could. So we got our way, and we kind of manipulated the system. And now we saw these famous people playing golf, and we used to get a little bit of money. They'd give you 50 cents for 9 holes. We'd get $1 or $2. And we thought we had big money, but these guys playing golf were so impressed with these little kids carrying the bag. They used to give us tips, and we get $2 or $3. And I'd go home with tell my mother I came home with $5 one day. She said, you didn't get that $5. Where did you get $5 at? I said, no, I was carrying this man's golf bag. So we learned entrepreneurship. We were aggressive as heck, and we didn't take no for an answer. Because when the man told us, we tripped him up. He said, Lejeune, you and Harry can't carry those bags. And we looked at him and said, well, why not? Did you ever try it? Well, he looked and said, well, yeah, okay, when you guys go ahead, and you're not going to make it. You're too small. You'll be tired. Well, guess what? He was wrong. And we were right. And we got exposed to golf on that end of it. So we've gotten exposed to golf on the negative side, not being able to use the clubhouse, but the positive side of meeting Joe Lewis, the heavyweight champion of the world, a lot of people never met. And also manipulating the system, saying, who told you I couldn't carry the bag for 9 holes? Did you say that, or is there rules? There were no rules, so we got our way.
Was the clubhouse renamed after Hughes?
Yes, Lejeune. That's one of the negotiations we got that's in black and white. The lady who, here's what happened. The lady who, I'm not mentioning her name, but I don't even want to give her any publicity. The lady who decided to try to close Hiawatha, she came up with a scheme. Well, if you guys keep it at 9 holes, we'll name the clubhouse after Solomon Hughes Clubhouse. Well, the Solomon Hughes Clubhouse ain't got to do with it's 18 holes or 9 holes. What's the difference? Are you trying to throw a little carrot out there for us? So that is an official document now, that when the clubhouse they're going to build a new one, regardless of whether the course is 18 holes or 9 holes, the new clubhouse will be named the Solomon Hughes Clubhouse. And that'll happen probably in the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, both of you. We'd like to invite all of you now to participate in a survey in which we would like to learn from you where and how we could document these fascinating stories. And tonight we had again an example of so much that we don't know. So the first question, and the survey is there. The first question is it important to document, honor, and preserve these events, places, histories? And you have a choice of answering yes or no. Question number 2, how should we preserve these places and people's histories? One choice is through recordings, another choice through statutes, and another museums in Minneapolis.
Can we say both? Do you have to do just one?
One, it's a single
Oh.
choice.
All right, okay.
And how would you like to show the next generation these histories? Then you have African American Registry through exhibits, museums in Minneapolis, or tours of historic homes.
I'm only getting two. I only got two questions. I haven't seen the other two to answer yes or no.
Can you move your screen down?
Oh, okay, up you mean? Okay, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let me see. Let me do this.
Because it's hiding. Mine was hiding as well. You see it?
So we only can take one choice, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And once you're complete, please hit submit. And we are going to see the results.
Hello, Melanie, do you have a question? And you're muted.
Yes, I had a question in regards to the information that was just shared about the Hiawatha Golf Course is something that, that I didn't know. So I was wondering, is there a way that possibly, this meeting is recorded, that maybe it could be posted like on YouTube or something like that, so the word can get out and the history of Hiawatha can get, out to the community to know, how, deep in the community, in the African American community, this golf course goes, and the importance of it that, was just mentioned. I think that is something that we have to figure out the best way to get out, like ASAP, and continue to educate, our African American community, our community as a whole, the importance of preserving the Hiawatha Golf Course. And just like the gentleman said, when Tiger Woods came, I actually was able to go, and I took my young son. Yeah. And he ended up playing golf in high school. He was like, very few African American kids to play golf in high school on the high school team. So I think this is something that we should see if we can put on YouTube or some way to get it out now.
I'll ask Judge LaJune Lang to address your question. Thank you for your question.
The Southside Pride, the Minneapolis spokesman, and Harry Davis have articles about the history that's being talked about now. One of the things we haven't covered tonight that Harry Davis has been receptive to is considering the National Register of Historic Places for Hiawatha Golf Course. That is a nomination process, and as Melanie stated, a deep knowledge of the history is important to support that nomination. So there are many reasons that the community needs to be educated. There are 25 other golf courses in the United States that are on the National Register of Historic Places, and that way they cannot be destroyed. So it's one thing for the community, but the community has to decide that's a course of action that they want to take.
Also, Lejeune, if I could add something to that, if you go on Google now, there is an extensive, very good history of Hiawatha Golf. You go on Google and say the history of Hiawatha Golf Course in Minneapolis, and it'll have some very good articles about the golf course. And then if you put in bronze, Upper Midwest Bronze Golf Open, BRONZE, bronze, they will have a lot of information there too. But I agree with Lejeune that we can't allow and continue to wait for people to do something for us that is dear to us. The National Register would be a classic example. And that's something our new park board candidates can consider. Mr. Rogers and Mr. Rucker.
Thank you. I was just wondering, Emery, if you have the results from the survey that you could show, and then the judge can. So we have the first question, 100% yes. Second question. The high choices were 75% of you chose that we should preserve these places and people's histories and museums in Minneapolis. And then question number 3, how would you like to show the next generation these histories? Through exhibits. 50% of you chose that, and then 38% chose museums in Minneapolis. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? Are there any more comments? We still have a little bit of time.
I think there's some questions in the chat, Antonia.
Thank you. All right. The question is amazing, Harry. Thank you. How can we help? And then Joseph Waters has a comment that KSTP's Joe Mizan did a story on Solomon a couple of months ago. And Judge, I don't see any other questions.
Thank you, Antonia.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes, this is Charles Rucker again. If it's possible, Mr. Davis, if I can get your number, we can exchange these other numbers so I can talk to you about, what I can do to help preserve Hiawatha Golf Course.
Yeah, here's what I'll do. I'll send it to Judge Lang and have her forward it to you.
Sounds good.
Okay. You
Sounds
want
good.
you want an email address or just a cell phone? What would be more convenient for you?
Both.
Okay, I'll send it to Judge Lang and have her forward it to you.
Yeah, because I am just like you said with the sister that was running, that was the president.
Yeah.
She was at large.
Yeah, he's running for city council now.
Yeah,
President. Yeah.
So yeah,
so
I'm running,
her.
so I'm running at large. So she's been
That's
my
good.
mentor going through this. So
Okay.
all right, so we'll talk.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question for Vivian about, you talked,
Right back.
I'm sorry, about gardening, and I'm curious about how families preserve their harvest over the winter. You said an African-American tradition that they had to adopt living here in the North?
Well, canning and freezing are two of the actually best ways. And when I first got here, people would go to the Green Giant. You know, they pick in the fields all night, all day.
Yes.
When the corn or the peas are exactly right, They whip out there, they turn on the lights if it's 2 a.m. and they pick those peas or they pick that corn. I've never seen anything like it. My dad had a small farm and we grew corn, we grew peas, that sort of thing. So we had 80 acres in Iowa. And so when I was first introduced to that, I knew how to can. My mother canned, of course. And so my roommate and I canned stuff like nobody's business. The other thing I like to do is, of course, freezing things. So learning how to do that and getting the freezer bags that suck all the air out and that sort of thing. Those are really good things. And you know, the other thing too is that I learned to do this with Weight Watchers of all things, is to plan my menu for the whole week. Okay. And so then I could plan to have extra portions. I would make extra portions, then I would freeze them. So anyway, just turns out it's a good way. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there is another question.
Sure.
Miss Vivian, I think we should have more programs that kids can learn to bake, to garden, and can food. My mother is in Missouri. And Ms. Rucker, would you like to state your question?
Yeah, I know we were mentioning about, just like the Hiawatha golf course and what Miss Vivian was discussing about, the youth and how she loves the youth and loves these things. And I think that's another thing that our youth are missing out on is, learning these skills from, our grown-ups and people that have these skills before they're lost. Like my mom sends me canned fruit and jelly and all that still. So I think, trying to figure out a way, like we had the Phyllis Wheatley's, we had these institutions, we can go back to the parks where these types of programs are taught to our young, our youth, these type of skills. And then also to, for, our elderly and people who, most of them that still have these skills are older, so they can teach them. And then that way, that can give programs to both all ages, that can learn from each other and bring all this back to the community.
I love anything that's intergenerational. Thank you for that. And I especially like Harry's thing about teaching kids how to golf, because working in the corporate world, I've found that many decisions are made on golf courses, not in conference rooms. So it's a important social skill to have, let's put it that way. Oh, is Vuzi still on? Or did he leave?
Oh, he was here.
I wanted him to say something about the master storytellers, because he directs.
I don't see him.
Don't see him anymore. Okay.
Well, Vivian, while we're waiting, did you ever make chow chow?
My mother made chow chow. And I never liked anybody's but hers, I have to tell you. Chow chow is, do you know what chow chow is?
I don't.
Okay. It's a salsa. It's a kind of salsa that a lot of Black people like. And, you get vegetables like green peppers and tomatoes and all this sort of stuff. And if you like corn, you can put that in it too. But chow chow is just great alongside meat and anything like that. I even liked it on hot dogs. So there you go.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. You know, speaking of Phyllis Wheatley and food, we had a lot of people who at the old Wheatley did these kinds of things, you know, taught classes in how to bake and such like. And I think it's important now that we've been through the siege with COVID and people have started learning these crafts again, bread making and so forth. Our kids need to know it, yeah, for sure.
Vivian, one of the things they had at Phyllis Wheatley, which is also related to that, on Saturdays, they'd have athletics and home economics.
Yes.
And it's separated and they should, because a lot of men should have learned how to cook really. But what they did at Phyllis Wheatley, if you were going to go out for sports on Saturday morning, if you were a young man, you had to go to African American. We had a whole library there. We saw Benjamin Bannister and Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver. And except if you didn't go, you couldn't go out for the sports. Mm-hmm. That was Earl Bowman and my dad's plan. Said, you're just not going to play football. You're not just going to play baseball, run track. You're going to learn about Jesse Owens and Mac Robinson and Jackie Robinson, and Horace Walker, and all the great Black athletes at the University of Minnesota, which we never knew of, but they were back in the 1920s, like Bobby Marshall, graduated from the University of Minnesota and Central High School in 1906. It was one of the first African Americans to play football, basketball, and ice hockey at the University of Minnesota. We didn't know that. Yes, ma'am. So Mr. Bowman and my dad said, you kids that are going out for football, if you're going to be down here at 10 o'clock to practice, you're going to be at 9 o'clock in the library to study and read some books. Oh, we don't want to do it. Either you get in about what you want to do, that's what you're going to do if you're going to play on the team. And the young ladies got to do ballet, tap dancing, and toe dancing, and home economics. So it wasn't just sports and glory, it was learning. Yeah. And we had some of the best instructors in the world because they were all school teachers.
You know, Earl and I had offices right next to each other up on the second floor. Yep. And he was really quite the guy. Quite the guy.
And they all had a picture of Phyllis Wheatley when you walked in the door. And it wasn't just a name, it was a picture of her and who she was and a little dossier history of her. So any youngster I'm going to go play football with Phyllis Wheatley. Well, what is that? What's the Phyllis Wheatley? Then they all knew. We knew. We were taught to know.
Very good.
Exactly.
Did you both go to the camp, the Phyllis Wheatley camp?
Absolutely.
Yes, Camp Parsons. Yes, ma'am.
Camp Parsons. I ran camps with Cozy Breedlove, and
I worked there in high school as a lifeguard and a counselor.
I had my doctor come and talk to the kids, and they could ask him that was the teen camp, and they could ask him any questions that they wanted to know about reproduction and so forth and so on. It was amazing. He just loved it, and so he would ask me, "Is it time for camp yet?"
Well, our biggest challenge was teaching kids how to put a worm on a hook and how to throw fish and start throwing out to catch fish instead of throwing the whole pole in the water. Because they literally did what you told them. They said, throw cast out there. So they take the pole and throw it out in the water. We said, no, you're not listening. Cast, bring, you know that. But kids do exactly what you tell them.
Yeah.
So we had a ball counseling and teaching kids when you sometimes hear something, it's right, but what do you hear me about? But are you listening?
Oh gosh, it was funny.
It was fun, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
I just love hearing this history, particularly about the Minneapolis metro area and historically Black institutions in Minnesota. We grew up, or I grew up on 48th in Portland, and it wasn't until I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago that I found out all the controversy about the first Black family that lived south of 38th Street, I believe it was.
Over on Columbus?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And you know, I basically lived there from the
Mhm.
from elementary school to junior high school, and I was not aware of all the history. In fact, I talked to Chucky, Mr. Solomon's son,
Mm-hmm.
and Jeff Robinson, Mr.
Yeah.
Robinson's son, and they said they weren't aware about it either, but their parents knew about it, but they
Mhm.
just didn't talk about it that much. But it's good to know this history, to know uh, the sacrifices that had to be made in order
Mhm.
for us to fight for the right to live where we wanted to, and play at the certain golf and sporting institutions and on down the line. So I really appreciate you all, Sister Vivian and uh, Brother Harry Davis, bringing this to light
Mhm.
for us who may not be as acquainted with these historical facts. So bless you and continue to spread the word in forums like this. It's really, truly appreciated. Thank you.
Well, one, just to add to that, one of you all know who Bishop Richard Howell is. Richard Howell's family moved over in Northeast Minneapolis when he was in junior high school. And I don't think his family was aware of how sensitive Northeast Minneapolis was to not have us around. And he tried to go to Northeast Junior High and was harassed so much and ridiculed that his family pulled him out of there and put him in private school, because Northeast Minneapolis was not legally off limits. It was just, we knew it was off limits. That's it. So Bishop Howell told me a great story about his childhood experience in that unfortunate situation. So it's out there, and all of us, I'll tell you, Brother Rucker, I knew about it because my grandmother told me about that family over in Columbus. But she also told me, if you ever go and Google search the African-American Yancey family of Edina. If you've heard of that, they were substantial, professional, educated teachers, pharmacists, etc., that lived in Edina before it was Edina, Morningside. And they are quite historically, in fact, they're going to name a building or a park after them in the near future because of their contribution to Edina, Minnesota.
A
The
park
Yancey
has
family,
been named, Mr.
why?
Davis.
Yep.
You are correct. There is a Yancey Park now in
Yes,
Edina.
yes, absolutely. And just to let you all know, when we were kids, when we play against Edina in sports, we knew what the initials were, EDINA. We'd play against them. We said, well, you guys aren't the Edina Hornets. Edina means every day I need attention. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, that's what it means. We had a level of leveling the playing fields back in the day.
Speaking of that, I just like to draw attention to an organization that is no longer called the Political Council of Black Women. And this group really was formed nationally to help Black women get elected. And we were not getting, there were organizations to help women get elected, and it was white women. It wasn't us. So this organization really worked hard to get that done. And then, once people started really making it, there wasn't a need for it anymore. But we had a very sizable group here. And
We
speaking of,
did.
yes, and we met at the Humphrey on the second floor. And, we had folks who got elected on school boards, mayors, were in those contests. that kind of stuff.
I was a new arrival as an immigrant, and I attended those meetings. It was really my first experience with American democracy. So I always be grateful to those women.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was so highly impressed.
And Lejeune, I think you know about that group too as well.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And
Actually, we
your,
didn't know each other.
yeah, your campaign was the first judge campaign I worked on. Yeah. So that was exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much. I won against the white male.
Yeah, you did.
There is a question,
yeah.
Vivian, on
Oh,
the chat
Is
box.
there in the chat? Okay, let me look.
Isn't there a successor organization to date, Political Council of Black Women?
I don't know it, if there is. Do you know, either of you know one? I don't. I don't think so.
No.
Nope. But anyway. Thanks for
I
the
wanted to ask Vivian, you described your fruit cake, but it
Yeah.
sounded so much like the Caribbean black cake, which is a fruit cake.
Yes. And the ribbon, yes, but it's a much weaker version of the Caribbean black cake.
Okay.
I mean, they keep spouting those things for years. They actually turn black. I've actually had a piece of one, and they're quite delightful, quite good. Not like anything else you've ever eaten, but quite good. Yeah. Indeed. So.
Well, I wanted to conclude by asking if there is anything you would like to comment on in terms of the settlement house wraparound services to our youth that we could use today.
Oh, absolutely. Harry has mentioned some really pertinent things. I mean, it never is too late or too early for kids to learn things like financial literacy, like taking care of yourself and where you live, getting the historical stories so that you have an identity in them, and when you're talking to people like Harry, for example, and you hear this story about how far their family goes back, that helps you get a sense that Black people are rooted here, that we've had a presence for a long time. And, it isn't just their family, but we share it together because they've been very generous with their leadership and so forth. So I think, just being able to rub up against people who know things and have done things is really good for the kids.
I agree, Vivian. I had an opportunity every African American History Month. I go down to the I don't call them rest homes anymore. That's not convalescent homes that have a large African American men and women. Mm-hmm. And surprisingly, the men are showing up. Usually, the first few years I spoke was almost all women.
Yeah,
but
sure.
You will find out an amazing part of the history if you open up for questions, and they'll tell you about their families. Oh, they're here. They may be shut in, but they're not shut out. They're there, and they're sharp as heck. I agree, and I also agree with what you said about settlement houses. There are various similar ones in Minneapolis. One is the Circle of Discipline, which was down on 12th Avenue and Lake Street, and they engage in discipline, hygiene. They have sports, but it's also learning, and it's learning what we call after school. Because my biggest problem with the school system, our average children are only in school 5 to 6 hours a day. 5 days a week. They're someplace else 17 to 16 hours. And whether they're on supervision or not, we just don't know. The schools can't do it. They don't have them long enough. They don't have the nurturing for them. And I will tell you this, a lot of times they say young people are not interested in our history. That's not true. Many times when I've made speeches, the mothers have brought their grandchildren with and the dads, because they want their kids to know, like we learned, you know, passing the word around us and listen to the elders. So they're out there. You just got to seek them out, and your kids will know too.
Thank you very much. I know, Harry, you raised a point about the freeway 35W. We also had the Riverview Supper Club taken by the Park Board.
Yep.
And the Park Board headquarters is now where the Riverview Supper Club was. We had the Way Community Center become the police station. It was torn down. And so there have been a lot of things that we regard that have been taken without our community input. So part of what we're doing with these community engagements is asking people not only tonight, but going forward into the future, as you think about a place that's been torn down, send us an email so we can remember where it was, as well as any place that you feel is in danger of being demolished or being forgotten. Send us an email, because we're trying to make a comprehensive mapping, not only of current buildings of interest and importance, but also document the past. Our community has not been studied in the depth that other communities may have been studied. So we're looking at 1860 to 2020, wanting to know where certain buildings used to be, where certain buildings are currently. I believe Phyllis Wheatley had 3 locations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Sumner Place was the first one. Then 809 Aldridge Avenue South was the one. I mean, Avenue North was the one next to Bethune-Cookman School. It was right in the front of it. That was the one that was there the longest time before the new one merged with Bethune. It was 809 Aldridge. Yeah, right.
Exactly. And it was a lovely building.
Oh, it was on. Vivian, I remember we used to go upstairs and listen to the people rehearse that were going to play at the Orpheum Theater. You know, and they would let us kids listen to. We saw Duke Ellington, and they stayed up there because they couldn't stay in the downtown hotel. It was a wonderful hotel. They didn't know at the top of Phyllis Wheatley. Beautiful rooms up there.
Yeah.
You know, so
I had an office in one. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it was very nice. You know, so in closing too, I would like to say that our history is there, but we can't wait on other folk to get it. We have to get due diligence and be proactive. And I agree, LeJune, if you know something's going to bite the dust or something's going to happen, Hiawatha also engaged the total community, the people that were homeowners around. Many people would come up to us at our meetings and say, we're so happy you're fighting for Hiawatha to stay open because we didn't know how to do it. The homeowners around the course itself. They just they don't have the political wherewithal, or they don't have the energy, whatever reasons they don't. Someone needs to take charge to save our history, and it also saves the community's history, which is not all African Americans. Other people live in there that want to save it too. You know.
Yeah, someone was it Joe? Yeah, Joe asked for the address of the old Phyllis Wheatley, which was on Aldridge.
809 Aldridge Avenue North.
And there was one before that. Do you remember that location? I think it was closer to the farmer's market.
Yeah, it was on Summit Place, but I don't know if Summit Place still exists. It was over by Munsingware. By the farmer, somewhere, and the grandmother told me it was Summit Place, but I don't know if that's something. But it was close. You're right, June. It was over there by the farmer's market, off of where the freeway goes over the top now. That was another one that wiped us out.
Yeah,
and I think it's Summit Place, I think.
See, that was long gone by the time I got there.
Yeah.
But then we lost that one, the 809 on Aldridge again.
Yes.
To a freeway coming through.
Yeah, and then the development, the homes there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to find out if you have any photographs of Phyllis Wheatley during the period that you were active. Any of the entertainers or people or parties or birthdays?
Yes, I'll send you some. Where I
Thank
have,
you.
my father has quite a few of them in his book. So I can resurrect some of those. They have pictures way back when he was like in kindergarten.
Yeah, oh, great. Yeah, that would be terrific.
Yeah.
I gave all the ones that I could lay my hands on the week before Wheatley 809 Aldrich was razed to the ground to the Historical Society because I knew they would be taken care of.
Also, Lejeune T. Williams is still alive. I know that.
Oh, yes.
Now he would know where some of the archives are and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So he would be a good resource.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we do have him, a request pending for him to speak on one of our later programs. So
Good.
Mm-hmm.
we hope he says yes.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be good.
And by the way, Phyllis Wheatley read her poems in front of the Queen of England.
Oh,
She was on a tour. She was very, very famous at the time.
Mm-hmm. And she was adopted by a rich white family in Boston named Wheatley. That's where she got her name from.
Yeah.
Great poet.
Yeah.
Before Emily Dickinson and all the
rest.
we
Yeah.
were told about.
She was the first American woman in print.
Yes, exactly.
You know, I just want to say thank you to Lejeune and Antonia and Aaron and so forth.
Thank you again. I'm happy that they're doing this. It's very well needed.
Yeah.
thank you so very much for participating.
We are so welcome.
Mhm.
There was one other question I wanted to slide into Harry, and that is 3621 Portland,
Yes, ma'am.
your childhood home.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we are noting places of significance.
Mhm.
And your father coached the Olympics boxing team with 9 gold medals over the years.
Yeah,
He ran for mayor of Minneapolis.
Yes.
And has anyone approached your family about nominating your home on the historic register?
No, they haven't. In fact, when you called me, I hadn't really thought about it, but then I said that's kind of neat because it still looks nice. There it is.
Mhm.
You know, I can remember that because we came from a house that didn't have grass, so I never had to cut the lawn. So when we got to that house, Dad, the first thing he took me to Sears and bought a lawnmower. I said, "What's that for?" He said, "Just look outside. You'll know what it's for." So we didn't have lawn and we didn't have walks to shovel. So it was a new day for all of us. And June, all of us, that was most of us, our first home that either we lived in multiple dwellings or the projects over north.
Mhm.
So it was a good time. It was a good time to be. It was a good time. That was a good era to live in because it was very proactive and politically focused. Good place to mentor a child.
And don't you think the fact that we lived in single family homes and lived within walking distance from school allowed our parents to be more involved in our education?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, Lejeune and the group, Minneapolis was laid out many years ago that no child's house would be more than 1 mile from an elementary school. That's why they had so many, because they didn't have busing. And then what we did is if Lejeune lived next door to me, I'd pick Lejeune up and somebody next door to her. By the time we got to school, there was 7 or 8 of us walking to school together, and all the parents knew where we were and what we were doing. So it was a very protected, aware, conscious community of who was doing what and where everybody was. It was very, very, very nice place to be raised.
Well, I want to close out. Thank you, Antonia, for hosting. We thank the audience. And of course, we thank Harry and Vivian for their wonderful, wonderful history. And we thank Rob Skalecki from the city of Minneapolis and Erin Kay for her participation tonight. Thank you all. And thank you, Shonice.
Thank you.
That'll
Thank you,
conclude our
everyone.
evening.
Thank you, Lejeune.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening.
All right,
Thanks,
bye.
everyone.
Did I go okay? You did excellent. Are you just saying that for your friend? Yeah. Yeah. I smell like meat.
So Bobby Lyle played keyboards?
Yes,
Nice.
that's who Spike was referring to that won the Yamaha contest.
Oh. Yeah, this is nice. Sounds like contemporary jazz to me. Hello, Sister Deisha. How are you, ma'am?
Thank you, Emery. You did a great job. It was a great show. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great opportunity to learn all this history right here in our backyard. And especially, you know, Afrocentric history that we just don't get.
Well, I wanted you to hear Bobby Lyle because that's who Spike talked about in terms of helping him launch the school at the Way and bring in the artists. He was from Central High.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah, that was such a stab in the heart when they closed Central High School. That was the hub in the community. It was, you know, all kinds of kids. The Nigerians who were well off sent their kids there, and yep, that's where Dad was recruited to as a math teacher from Arkansas.
It was an impressive building. When I was an exchange student living on a farm in southern Minnesota, I got to come and live for 1 week in the Central neighborhood, and Central High School was the school that I went to, and I was impressed by how many foreign languages were taught at that high school as well.
Yeah, it was really a classy place.
It was impressive building, I can remember.
Yeah, it's one only school that I was aware of that had a tunnel from the school to the football field where they could run through directly from the locker room straight onto the football field under the street that separated the school from the football field.
Wow. I think it's interesting to hear the plan perspective back then, not having schools more than 1 mile away from a child's home. how much we have shifted from that, and I'm not sure the results have been the best. Having kids crisscross the